Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Amy Kendal from the Maryville Crisis Nursery. I am the director of the Crisis Nursery, and we're here to meet with our friend Beth Klieger, correct?
Yes. Good evening,
from
everyone.
our partner from Catholic Charities, who the month before, we talked with Christy Richardson from Catholic Charities in regards to some of the services that are happening on the west side of the city in regards to the Tolton Center, which is located at Lake Street in Central. And we thought it was really critical that we take the time today to discuss in a little bit more detail some of the domestic violence Westside program, where Beth is the clinical manager, and we're just so delighted to have you here in order to really communicate with the community about the needs of families who might be in an unsafe situation. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today and to share a little bit more about our program. So we are the Domestic Violence Westside program through Catholic Charities, and we're a bit of a newer program. We really got started during the pandemic to address the needs of domestic violence occurring and heightening during the pandemic. So we've been around for about a year, since December of about 2020. And whenever I talk about our program, I like to kind of go over the definition of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, because I think it's helpful to hear it and to have a better understanding. So domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors designed to establish power and control over an intimate partner or family member through fear and intimidation. Whenever I go over this definition, I always like to highlight the word pattern, because we're seeing behaviors happen over and over again. It's not just a one-time occurrence. And then also really highlight those words power and control. Because domestic violence, whether it's something occurring in a relationship with a family member or a roommate, or specifically intimate partner violence, where it's occurring in an intimate relationship, it is about one person trying and maintaining that power and control over the other. So I also like to highlight, too, in the Illinois Domestic Violence Act, domestic violence is defined either by people in an intimate relationship, so that could be people who are currently dating or dated in the past. There could be people who are engaged or married or have been engaged or married in the past. But it also could be two people who have a child or allegedly have a child in common, even if they're not intimate partners, or two adults who are sharing a home or common dwelling, so roommates, or a person with a disability or a person who is elderly and their personal assistant or caregiver.
Beth, if you don't mind me asking, one of the things that came up actually today at the Crisis Nursery is a parent was explaining some of the verbal abuse that she was getting. She's an adult herself, in her 20s, but she was really relaying some serious concerns about her mother, who was sort of saying some very verbal abusive things to her. Would that constitute as a domestic violence situation based on that relationship, if it was an adult parent to an adult child?
Yes, yeah, that's a really good question. And specifically for our program, that does count as domestic violence. So someone who is experiencing that verbal and emotional abuse from another adult family member could come and seek our services.
Okay.
Specifically, in terms of obtaining an order of protection, I think it would kind of depend on specifically the abuse that was happening and what they talked about in courts, kind of case by case. But yes, that is domestic violence. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, no, it's...
So our program, we have two main goals. And so one goal is really that direct service, so empowering survivors, assisting them in regaining control over their lives, and ultimately moving towards healing. And that second goal we have is outreach. So collaborating with community partners like the Crisis Nursery and other community partners on the west side, and increasing prevention. So direct services, specifically, I'll go into some details. What we have is free and confidential services for anyone who either is or has experienced domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And these services are free and confidential. for people 14 years and up, because we also know that these power and control dynamics can occur in teenage intimate relationships as well. And so we have one-on-one counseling, and that consists of some psychoeducation on those dynamics. So talking about power and control, talking about the cycle of violence, and also safety planning. And every time I mention safety planning, I like to share that safety planning kind of is a broad range of things that could be done. We safety plan with people who might be in a relationship and planning to stay in a relationship. There's still ways to be as safe as possible and talking through that. We also safety plan with people who are out of a relationship and might have been out of it for a while, but still feel like there are some safety concerns. And then we also stress the importance of safety planning if someone is planning to leave a relationship. Since we know when someone who is a survivor is leaving a relationship, that partner is losing that power and control, and so things can escalate. So it's really important to have a plan. So we safety plan with people, kind of no matter where they're at on that continuum. And then we also have a mental health therapist on staff as well, who can provide other modalities of counseling. So if someone is also feeling maybe some bits of depressive thoughts or anxiety because of the trauma they've experienced, they can see our therapist as well. And then we have case management. We know that people who might have experienced abuse might be looking for new housing or job readiness or childcare or other things like that. So we have a case manager who can support them. And then we also have some support groups. So we have just a DV support group, and we know it's important for people to kind of hear from not just the professionals, but other people who might have been through similar experiences. And then we also have a DCFS curriculum. So if anyone has gotten involved with the DCFS system, based on some of the domestic violence, we have a 7-week curriculum course that people can join and graduate from and get a certificate.
So I'm glad you brought up about the groups, because I do think that there's a lot of value in getting support from others. Is that something that happens at the Tolton Center, or is that on virtual right now?
That's a great question. So with safety concerns around the pandemic, we've mainly been doing it virtually via Zoom.
Okay.
But recognize too that some people might not have safe access to Zoom. So we can be flexible if someone does need to come in and join the group via Zoom. We can do it that way, just so everyone can participate.
Yeah, that's great.
And then our second piece, kind of going more into those outreach and trainings. So we provide free trainings to community partners located on the west side of Chicago. So whether that's hospitals and health clinics, social service organizations, child welfare organizations, community partners, or religious groups or religious communities. And we have various different training topics. So we have just kind of the Domestic Violence 101. So we review dynamics, power control, the cycle of violence. For more hospital and health-based clinics, we have a training about Futures Without Violence's CUES method. And CUES stands for Confidentiality, Universal Education, and Support. And there, it's an evidence-based practice on how to screen. So really stressing the importance of screening and asking patients about domestic and intimate partner violence, knowing that this could be the only time that they're in a confidential setting when they come to maybe see their primary care doctor. Or
Well, and maybe, I don't know if you know of information about this, and I was understanding that manicurists or beauticians need, or I don't know if they're required to go through the training, but they sometimes get training in Illinois in order to help somebody who might disclose something during those times. Is that true?
Yes, so there is a training. We specifically in our program don't offer that training, but if anyone ever contacted our program, we'd make sure to connect them with who does.
Okay.
So yeah, and I'm pretty sure that it is part of the continuing education for their licensure as well. That might be recent, but I know the training has been around for a while. Also knowing that at a manicure appointment or a hair appointment might be another time where someone is away from the person causing harm and they could share.
Okay, it's good to know.
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's great training and resource. And then we've done some trainings with organizations kind of DV 202 and really gone in depth about how to safety plan, kind of other types of interventions or resources in the community, talking about the court process, just so if someone is supporting someone going through it, they have a little bit of knowledge about it, and various other aspects like that. So right now we provide the direct services at the Tolton Peace Center, which Amy said was on Lake and Central. And our targeted area for services are communities located on the west side of Chicago, so roughly west to Austin Boulevard, south to 31st, east to Halsted, and north to Montrose is our main service area. But of course, if anyone calls our intake line that's not in our service area, our intake professional can support them, make sure they get connected to either another DV agency or a domestic violence trained clinician within Catholic Charities. And our program's intake number is 312-655-7106. We are, since I said we were a newer program and a bit of a smaller program, it's not a hotline right now, so it is a business hours intake line, roughly about 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. So a client, someone experiencing or someone who has experienced domestic violence, or even a professional or a family member who has questions about domestic violence can call that number and speak with our intake worker. If someone is wanting those services, they'll complete an intake and then get assigned a clinician and or case manager or both. If someone's calling in crisis, our intake worker helps with safety planning, helps with connecting to domestic violence shelters, and can help with transportation as well. So on here, I have some contact information. So
this is great. So you got some nice numbers up here. That intake number is really the primary number that people should be calling.
Yes, that intake number bolded up at the top.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I also have on here the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline number. Again, since I said we're unfortunately not a hotline at this time, this is also on our voicemail because we know crisis can happen in the middle of the night, can happen on the weekends. It's not just a business hour situation. So we always steer people to the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline number as well. And this number is really helpful. There's advocates who can help with safety planning, interpretation services, and then also identifying shelter. So all of the different domestic violence shelters in the state of Illinois do a bed count twice a day with the hotline, in the mornings and in the evening. So if anyone is ever looking for shelter, the best place to start is calling the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline and asking if they are aware of any open spaces.
And, maybe you can speak a little bit to a parent or somebody in a family who has several children, or is it common for all the family to be able to go to that same shelter? So
yes.
So typically they're family shelters.
Yes, oftentimes, and each shelter is a little different and operates, how they specifically operate, but each shelter should have rooms where there might be, space for parents and their children, and sometimes bigger rooms if there's a larger family, or smaller rooms, and then also rooms for single adults as well. Mm-hmm. So the hotline will also kind of share that information. Okay. So someone can say, myself and my 3 children are looking for shelter, and they can look specifically for space for a family.
Okay, good to know.
So next on here, I had some psychoeducational tools that we often talk about when talking about domestic violence. So like I've mentioned before, you've heard me say power and control a lot. And on here we have the power and control wheel. And so there's various different ways that someone can try to obtain and maintain power and control in a relationship. I'm happy to highlight a couple.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
So on here we have that emotional and verbal abuse. I heard you mention that too earlier. I mean, I always stress how important it is to take emotional and verbal abuse very seriously. I've talked with survivors who have shared how much impact that emotional and verbal abuse have on them, and how it is so difficult because from the outside looking in, sometimes people can't really visualize it or see it because you don't necessarily see a bruise or a scar, even though
and
it is very effective.
I sometimes wonder if people question, you just have to be tough, like it's just words, it doesn't mean anything, or you should know that's just meaningless. But once you're in that type of relationship and it's been ongoing, it's hard to recognize where the lines of like maybe an argument that somebody's having and words that are expressed, and can they repair that versus something that's just very shameful and degrading to people. So that's always been, I think, somewhat of a difficult one, and it happens quite often where people don't even really realize that that's not okay, how people are being talked to.
Right, and that's what is happening. And a lot of times too with that emotional and verbal abuse, there's degrading names and trying to lower someone's self-esteem. And also with that can be some of that psychological abuse as well, like gaslighting. So someone might not be thinking it was as big a deal because the person is saying, I was just kidding, or you're being too sensitive, or this really didn't happen like this, you're overthinking it.
Yeah.
But also, and this kind of bleeds into that isolation a little bit as well, is trying to put someone down or speak badly about them to other people in their lives. So even trying to cut off some of those other relationships as well, so that person has maybe less people to go seek out support from.
And I see you have here technology and stalking, and stalking seems sort of obvious to me, but how does that look in terms of technology?
That's a great question. I think more and more we're seeing more things with technology, because there's definitely the verbal emotional abuse that can happen over technology. So those unwanted messages, whether it be, I feel like I used to say email a lot, but Instagram has Messenger, the DM, and Facebook has Messenger, and even tagging people in statuses, and or we see a lot too, making up fake profiles to try to friend someone and then follow what they are doing or comment on them, or even sharing then things about the survivor, the person using harm, if there's pictures or messages or things that, confidential information that they then share about someone via technology.
Okay.
There's also a lot of social media apps that have location sharing. So I know like Snapchat has the world view, and if you don't know if that's turned on, or if you want that on for some of your friends to see you, someone might be able to go in and see that you're, what street, what address you're at, because your icon pops up there.
Wow, so it's just something to really be very much aware of and be asking lots of questions about. Something as simple as a phone has become so much more of a instrument of safety, and yet it could be harmful depending on how it's being used,
Exactly. And even specifically like with an iPhone or a smartphone, that sharing location, if you never turn that off, or if you've been able to find your friends with someone, then they might be able to see your location where you go. The other one that I always find so important to highlight is that minimizing, denying, and blaming. It kind of speaks again to that term gaslighting that I was talking about. Almost, every survivor that I have worked with has at some point shared feelings of, I thought that this was my fault, because the person using harm has blamed that person. Or if you hadn't been late, or if you hadn't gone to the event that I told you not to go to, I wouldn't have had to yell at you or hit you or, perpetrate the type of abuse they are. So that I always think is a really powerful one, that minimizing it, or even just denying it happened at all. You must be imagining it, or I've seen this, on TV, or that's what happened to your friend. Like, this didn't happen within our relationship. The other thing, which I often hear as a myth of domestic violence is, that person just lost control. They were just really angry and they lost control, and that's why this explosive event happened. And so we always like to remind people that, those types of power and control tactics, the names, the trying to end relationships, the minimizing, denying, and blaming, the stalking, all of those things are part of that pattern that are decisions that the person using harm is making. I'm going to do these things to obtain power and control. So it's actually a way that someone can achieve control in the relationship. It is not, perpetrating that abuse is not a loss of control.
Yeah, that can be really misunderstood by many people. And I think, the fact that you sharing these examples are really important because at this time during the pandemic and now, with this newer surge and the weather is cold and people are inside more, the more we can make sure we know what's okay and what's not okay is just really critical right now. And I see you have some information here about safety planning.
Yes, yeah. So what we often say, if a survivor's in an abusive relationship, one of the most important steps they can take is to make a safety plan. And they can make a safety plan for in their home, when they're in their community, either at a workplace or at school. And also, even if someone has left a relationship, a safety plan could still be a helpful tool. And these plans contain simple but critical steps a survivor can take to increase safety while they deal with violence that they might face. Mm-hmm. But I always say too, there are some basic kind of safety plan templates and safety plan ideas that I'll talk a little bit about. But safety planning is unique for every person mm-hmm. and every situation. And the really important thing is making sure that safety plan feels good to the person who needs the plan. And so each one is a little different, but I'll go over an overview of just some ideas of ways to be safe.
That'd be great.
So there can be safety during a violent incident. So again, if someone is in an abusive relationship, if things were to escalate, kind of having a plan for what to do if that escalation or that violence occurs. If someone is preparing to leave. If someone is at their home, whether that's with the partner using harm or living in a new home, school or workplace, online, like we talked about with the technology, safety for children, and also safety for pets.
Mm. Yeah, that's the whole family right there, huh?
Yeah. So some things for safety during a violent incident, we often stress to kind of know your surroundings, know your home, and to, if you feel like something is escalating, to go to a low-risk area. So avoiding areas like the kitchen, the bathroom, and the garage. And we talk about that because within the kitchen and the garage, there's a lot of items that aren't meant to be weapons but could be used as one. And then also with the bathroom, I think a lot of times there's this thought of getting away and shutting the door and kind of enclosing yourself away from someone who's trying to harm you. But the bathroom is somewhere that there's only one exit usually, and that's the way kind of back into the home. And with it being such a small room with lots of hard surfaces, we often say to try to avoid going in there. Sometimes we also talk about having a safe escape route, talking about maybe if you had to run out of the home, where you could go, whether that is if someone has a vehicle that they can jump in their car and have their keys kind of on a hook that's always accessible, or if there's a neighbor's house or maybe a 24-hour place nearby. The other thing that we've talked about with a lot of survivors as well is even saying maybe what they feel like might be needed to help calm their partner, even if that is something that is not true. We know with domestic violence being about power and control that when things are escalating, sometimes there could be something that could be said where the person using harm might then feel like they're, remaining with that power and control, and that might de-escalate that situation in the moment.
Well, that you really have to think about that if it's obviously an unexpected situation.
Right,
you have to be thinking about that ahead of time in hopes you never have to use it, but just in case, obviously.
Right, and all of this would be, yes, if you thought about it and talked about it, that might kind of be at your fingertips when something is occurring.
Yeah, it's really about trying to be planful, expecting the worst case scenario, or not expecting it, but hoping you don't have the worst case scenario, but if you are in a situation that you kind of know what your next steps are, just like any other type of emergency that you might experience in your family, a fire or something else that might come up.
And then we talk again about safety when preparing to leave, that it is helpful to have a plan, knowing that power and control and violence could escalate at that point. So possible making a plan with a support system, having items stored in a safe place, and usually not somewhere that might be obvious, so not a bag at the door where the person using harm might be kind of alerted to leaving, but maybe somewhere in the home or even somewhere else with a safe person, that you can have some important items. Again, we talk about even checking the phone for turning off the GPS or Find My Friend trackers. And then we have a list of just important documents that can be helpful to have kind of ready, especially things like identification, driver's license, birth certificates, social security cards.
Yeah, and this is just a good reminder as a parent in general, or anybody that, having a file or an envelope or someplace where you have your very important papers is just kind of critical. So that way you can be prepared when different things come up. So that's just really, that's a terrific list there.
Thank you. Safety. So safety in my own residence, we always like to share a couple resources, like the Safe Homes Act. So we often say, if need be, to change locks on doors or windows as soon as possible. And if you are renting and you are a survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault, you are the landlord is required to change those locks if you do request to do so or to end your lease early.
I see you put in here about the Safe Homes Act. This is good information for people to have.
And I've worked with people who have talked about, telling their landlord about this, and they've gone ahead and done it. Sometimes we've written letters with our client's permission, and that has gotten landlords to do it. But it's definitely something that works for people. Safety on the job and in public. We talk if people are comfortable potentially informing a colleague or a supervisor or security on site about the situation and what they feel comfortable with that person doing to help if an ex-partner was to show up on site. We talk with a lot of our clients about safety for children. So talking with children about safety. So definitely using developmentally appropriate language when talking to children, saying things like, we're practicing what to do in an emergency versus, we're practicing what to do if your mom or dad becomes violent. Really reminding children that violence is never right, and also reminding children that violence or whatever is occurring is not their fault, because we know that children who might be witnessing violence might feel or internalize or think that they did something wrong at some point. So not assuming that they know that it is not their fault, but really, reminding children that. List of safe adults who can pick children up from daycare or preschool or school.
Yeah, because our little ones are taking it all in, so we really do need to be very protective of them and what's happening. So it's important to keep them as part of the plan.
Yes, yeah, and that's also where even the crisis nursery we've talked about. Clients can utilize the crisis nursery as a resource if needed as well in their safety planning.
And then just to we got a little bit more than about a minute here. So I thought this was important to just sort of share about your pets, that there are resources if you do have a pet.
Yes. So there are a couple short-term shelters for pets that they can stay at. And the Safe Haven Network helps kind of plan around pets as well. And pets can be added to an order of protection in Illinois. So.
Well, Beth, this has really been very useful. There was a lot of great information here in order to share with the community that, when you're in a situation that you're not feeling safe or if you have questions, maybe you could give that phone number again, Beth?
Yes, 312-655-7106. And definitely call if you have any questions or just want to talk or have a consultation. You don't need to give any identifying information to talk to any of myself or my team.
Well, and we know that asking for help is a sign of strength. So thank you so much for your time this evening, Beth. And
yes,
everyone, have a good evening.
Have a good evening.